History books gave you just one black woman from the Wild West and used that name to make you believe the rest didn't exist. They did exist. Mary Fields took on the male route in Montana that no man wanted. Cathay Williams fought in the U.S. Army for 2 years, dressed as a man. Neither of them appears in any Western movie. These are 20 dark truths that Hollywood has actively hidden since it made its first Western. If you like the version of history that tells the truth, subscribe and leave a like on this video. It directly helps keep this channel going. Let's get started. Fact 20. Fact 20. The Invisible Kitchens. In 1872, a woman listed in Abilene City, records as Jenny Black, appears in 31 consecutive weekly payroll documents. No full name, no occupation, just 2 words, Jenny and cook. Now, Jenny managed the kitchen of one of the town's largest saloons. And the same records show that the weeks when Jenny's pay was cut were the weeks when the saloon owner's profit margin also dropped. In Hollywood's westerns, the saloon was always the same. White bartenders behind the bar, white cowboys in front, no black women, none. But the real saloon economy of the 1870s and 1880s worked differently. In frontier towns across Kansas, Colorado, and Missouri, Abilene, Dodge City, Wichita, saloon kitchens were almost entirely run by black women. Cooking was one of the few doors through which black women could legally enter, and those who walked through that door worked right at the heart of the town's largest business hub. A saloon owner couldn't exist without a cook. That owner's income depended on the labor of the woman in the kitchen. These women were never recorded by name in any official ledger. The story of the hands that built the West has never been told. Fact 19. Unprovable ownership. In the 1860s and 1870s, the vast majority of black women could not legally own property in their own names. In some states, this right existed in theory. In practice, it was impossible. But this did not mean they did not run saloons. Archives in Kansas and Missouri contain dozens of business documents where the actual owner was a black woman, but the official record listed another name, a male partner or a white sponsor. These women knew they could not enter the legal system. They built a structure outside the system. The partners held the paperwork. The women ran the business. Their names didn't appear in any of the documents. But everyone in town knew who was running the business. Tax records, court testimonies, small newspaper ads. These fragments are the only documents proving the existence of hundreds of women. There was no systematic history. There were fragments, and these fragments are enough. Fact 18. Mary Fields and the Saloon Door. Mary Fields was born into slavery in Tennessee in 1832. After gaining her freedom, she migrated north. In Montana, she began working at St. Peter's Mission. She carried heavy loads. She cleared land. She did the jobs men refused. The mission fired her because she carried a gun and drank. She was 63 years old. She applied to the U.S. Postal Service. She was assigned Montana's most dangerous mountain route. Previous carriers had abandoned that route. The snow was deep. The cold was deadly. Mary Fields didn't care. For 8 years, she never missed a single delivery. Not once. And at the end of every workday, she walked through the saloon door in Cascade. She sat down. She drank whiskey. She smoked a cigar. No one could say a word to her. In 1895, the mayor banned women from drinking in the saloon. The only exception was Mary Fields, because the mayor had no other choice. This is recorded in the Montana State Archives. In Hollywood, this woman never existed. Fact 17. Cathay Williams and the Army's Secret. In 1866, Cathay Williams enlisted in the U.S. Army under the name William Cathay, under a male identity. She was born into slavery in Missouri. She spent most of the post-war period in poverty. The Army was closed to black women. It was open to black men. Williams knew this. She joined the 38th Infantry Regiment. She became part of the Buffalo Soldiers, Kansas, New Mexico, Colorado. For 2 years, no one uncovered her secret. In 1868, a military doctor discovered the truth during an examination. She was immediately discharged. She applied for a disability pension due to health issues. It was denied. Her enlistment had already been illegal. In 1876, the St. Louis Daily Times interviewed her. She revealed her name. She told her whole story. No one listened. The U.S. Army officially honored Cathay Williams in 2016, nearly 130 years after his death. 16. Fact: the economy of dance halls. In 1877, the Dodge City Times mentioned a saloon performance. It said, "Among the most sought-after voices at Long Branch." It didn't name names. It called her a colored dancer. In the October issue of that same year, that voice was gone. The saloon owner lamented that he had lost his most profitable months. This woman had built a power base, nameless. The dance halls of the Wild West were not merely entertainment venues. For black women, they were nearly the only legitimate source of income. Singing, dancing, playing music. These were the jobs society deemed appropriate. This tolerance was a trap. Wages were low. Living quarters were usually the saloon's upper floor. There was no legal protection for personal safety. But some turned the system on its head. There were women whose names appeared in newspaper articles, women who forced saloon owners into wage negotiations. The system was designed to crush them. Some stood their ground. Fact 15. Dodge City's underground economy. There is a pattern in the Dodge City archives. Late 1870s, early 1880s. Multiple food and beverage establishments are listed in the records under a man's name. Court testimonies and tax dispute documents paint a different picture. Black women were the ones actually running the businesses. These were not isolated cases. It was a pattern. In Dodge City, in Abilene, in Wichita. That saloon opened in the morning because someone had been stoking the fire and baking bread since midnight. The name on the records was the one who opened the door. The one running things inside was someone else. The cattle trade turned Dodge City into a legend. The women who fueled that trade remained among the unnamed. Hollywood created a legend out of the cowboy. It created nothing out of those women. 14. Fact: Biddy Mason and the Promise of the West. Biddy Mason was born into slavery in 1818. In 1851, her owner moved her and her family from Mississippi to California. Over 3,000 miles, on foot, as a slave. She learned that California was a free state. She filed a lawsuit. She won in 1856. She obtained her freedom through a court ruling. She worked as a nurse in Los Angeles. She saved money. She bought land. She became one of the city's first black landowners. She sold that land to the growing city. By the 1880s, she was among the wealthiest, not just among black people, but among all residents of Los Angeles. Los Angeles's first AME church was built on land she donated. She established a travel assistance center. She distributed money directly to the poor. Her name was absent from the history books of the next generation. Fact 13. Clara Brown and the Colorado Gold Rush. Clara Brown was born into slavery around 1800. When her owner died, the family was scattered. Her children were sold to other people. She didn't know if she would ever see her daughter again. After gaining her freedom, she went to Colorado, right in the middle of the 1859 gold rush. She opened a laundry in Central City. She washed the miners' clothes. She earned money. She saved. She became one of Colorado's most successful black businesswomen, and she gave back a large portion of what she earned. She spent it on bringing former slaves to Colorado. She organized. She funded. She built her community. She was reunited with her daughter, who had been sold 35 years earlier. She was still alive. She became the first black woman inducted into the Colorado Businesswomen's Hall of Fame. Her name appears in no mainstream narrative about the Wild West. None. Fact 12. Celia and the Law That Didn't Protect You. In 1855, in Callaway County, Missouri, a young enslaved woman named Celia killed the man who had been raping her for years. His name was Robert Newsom. He owned her. The attacks began the day he bought her at the age of 14. She was put on trial. Her defense argued that Missouri law granted every woman the right to defend herself against sexual violence. The court rejected this. Celia was not a human being. She was property. This right did not apply to her. She was executed in December 1855. This ruling did not remain confined to Missouri. It spread westward with every settler migrating to the frontier territories. Black women working in the saloons of the Wild West in the 1870s and 1880s were not operating in a legal vacuum. They worked under rules explicitly written to exclude them. Those rules followed them every mile westward. Fact 11. Women who carried guns. There is an entry in the 1875 Wichita City Marshal's log. A black woman, armed, wage dispute, weapon confiscated, no charges filed. The woman's name was not recorded. Her weapon was recorded. This was not an isolated case. Black women carrying firearms in frontier towns repeatedly appear in court records, territorial marshal reports, and local newspaper articles. Carrying a firearm was not merely an act of defiance. In a system designed to exclude them, it was their only reliable means of protection. Non-newspapers only wrote about these women when an incident occurred. A conflict, a wage dispute, a court case. Every story began in nearly the same way. A brief note, the woman identified by a descriptor rather than her full name, and the outcome reported without moral judgment. These notes are nearly the only records of the existence of hundreds of women who passed through the frontier economy, leaving no trace. Fact 10. The Exodusters and Williana Hickman. In 1879, thousands of African Americans migrated to Kansas to escape the violence and economic oppression of the Reconstruction era. This movement went down in history as the Exoduster. In this narrative, men take center stage. Benjamin Pap Singleton is frequently mentioned. But the women were largely the ones who actually organized the migration. Williana Hickman was one of these women. She wrote one of the first-hand accounts of the arrival in Nicodemus, Kansas. She wrote that they arrived in the winter. She wrote that the ground was frozen. She wrote that they dug into the ground for shelter. They started from scratch. Her account is housed in the archives of the Kansas Historical Society. It is rarely cited. Nicodemus, the only Exoduster town still standing today, was built upon the churches, schools, and local businesses established by black women. These women's names appear in the town's founding documents. It didn't make it into the textbooks. Fact 9. Cracks in the laws. Banning interracial marriage and cohabitation were in effect in many states during the Wild West era. But enforcement of these laws was inconsistent. It was selective. And they were ignored when it didn't suit the authorities. Records from Dodge City, Ellsworth, and Wichita show that interracial relationships were far more common than legal proceedings would suggest. The law existed. The relationships existed. The gap was filled by silence. 1876 Ellsworth County Court records document a case. A woman filed a lawsuit against a white business partner for breaching a boarding house agreement they had jointly operated. Her name appears in the record. Her testimony was not accepted. The case was dismissed. The system that claimed to regulate these relationships protected only one side. This asymmetry was not accidental. It was by design. 8. Fact. Unnamed networks. The Underground Railroad, the Escape Network, is remembered solely as a pre-war institution. This is incorrect. Networks that kept people safe from danger continued to operate during the frontier era, through saloons, through boarding houses, through churches and laundries, through spaces managed by black women on the outskirts of frontier towns. Leavenworth, Kansas's county records from the 1870s identify multiple boarding houses along the Missouri-Kansas border as transit points for people fleeing conditions in the South. The women who ran these establishments appear by name in property dispute documents. Their roles within the network were not recorded in these documents. Historians working in the archives made the connection. The invisibility that made these women effective also made it easy to erase them from the record. The two were one and the same. Fact 7. Doctors of the Frontier. There were no hospitals in frontier towns. In many settlements in Kansas and Colorado during the 1870s, there was no licensed physician within 50 miles. Those with practical medical knowledge were overwhelmingly black women. This was no coincidence. The plantation economy had forced enslaved women to become healers, to meet the medical needs of the enslaved population without official supplies or training. This knowledge was oral. It was precise and comprehensive. Leavenworth County's probate records from 1869 to 1874 list the same name across 3 separate files. Martha Spencer. In each file, she is listed as the person who took charge of the patient's care during the final weeks of the deceased's life. She had no license, no official payment was recorded, but 3 separate families listed her in the records because she was the only person they could turn to. History has passed this information off as folk medicine. Those who relied on it called it the only medical care they had. 6. Fact. The day the narrative was shattered. 1915. D.W. Griffith released the film The Birth of a Nation in February 1915. It was the first film shown at the White House. Woodrow Wilson described it as history written in lightning. The film romanticized the Confederacy. It portrayed the Ku Klux Klan as defenders of civilization. It presented black men and women as threats that needed to be suppressed. It was shown in movie theaters for years. It triggered a resurgence of the Klan's influence. It led to riots in multiple cities. And by every commercial measure of the time, it was a massive financial success. Its impact on Western cinema was direct and lasting, and the already scarce presence of black women in frontier storytelling was completely erased after 1915. Names that appeared in newspaper articles, boarding house operators, mail carriers, women who established businesses on the frontier, vanished from the cultural record. Failing to mention these women was no longer an oversight. It was an active choice. This choice was made in 1915. It remained valid for a century. Fact 5. Nat Love and the Witnesses. Nat Love, known as Deadwood Dick, was born into slavery in Tennessee in 1854 and became one of the documented black cowboys of the Wild West. He published his autobiography in 1907. The book is one of the rare first-hand accounts of frontier life written by someone who lived it, and it features black women. Boarding house owners providing lodging for traveling workers, armed cooks managing the kitchens of businesses, small-scale entrepreneurs in every town he passed through. Love does not portray them as extraordinary. He presents them as ordinary elements of the frontier economy. That is why this testimony is significant. These were not exceptional women who had achieved something above the system. They were women who would have been considered ordinary by any black traveler journeying across the West. Nat Love's book still sits on the shelves of the Library of Congress. It has never been adapted into a film or television series. 4. Fact. Bass Reeves and the Invisible Network. Bass Reeves served as a federal deputy marshal in the Indian Territory from 1875 to 1907. He arrested over 3,000 people. In his 32 years of active service, he was never shot. The arrest records are detailed. They consistently use the term local source. Informants who provided local intelligence and verified identities in controversial cases. Historians compared the geographic distribution of Reeves's arrests with the settlement patterns of black communities in the region. There is a consistent correlation. The areas he most frequently targeted correspond to those where black women ran boarding houses, laundries, and saloon kitchens. Women who could see everyone passing through town. Women whom the men they observed deemed insignificant. Those excluded from the system were the ones who saw it most clearly. Fact 3. The architecture of erasure. To understand why black women left so few traces in the history of the Wild West, one must examine the record-keeping systems of that era. Not speculate. Examine directly. Federal Census on 1870 and 1880. Black individuals were recorded in separate columns, by gender and age, not by name. Black women's names appear at a much lower rate than those of comparable white populations. When a name does appear, occupational information is often missing. Property records. Since black women could not register property in their own names, the businesses they operated were registered under male partners or white proxies. The woman's name appears nowhere. Newspaper reports. Local frontier. Newspapers wrote about black women only when an event, crime, legal dispute, public conflict made their existence meaningful to readers. Their achievements were not news. These 3 omissions were not isolated incidents. They were the outcomes of a system that had structurally decided certain lives were not worth recording. And the silence in the archives was not empty. It was constructed. 2. Fact. Businesses established under the sun. By the late 1880s, the laundries, food establishments, and small retail spaces founded by black women in Colorado and Kansas were, according to estimates by historians working with state and county archives, comparable in absolute numbers to those established by men. These figures do not appear in historical surveys of the frontier era. The reason is not a lack of information. It is that the data was never systematically compiled. Starting in the 2000s, academic researchers began this compilation. Heritage records, tax rolls, city directories, county court files. They pieced them together one by one to create a tableau that the original record keepers never intended to create. A laundry, a boarding house, a small kitchen, each one financed, managed, and sustained by the hands of a woman whom the official record deemed unworthy of a name. What history overlooked were not small businesses. They were the women who chose to survive. 1. Fact. Beyond the written. When Mary Ellen Pleasant died in 1904, she left a single instruction for her headstone. She was a friend of John Brown. 4 words. Not a businesswoman, not a philanthropist, none of the categories she belonged to. The historical identity she chose positioned her in open opposition to slavery, not merely as someone who intellectually supported it, but as someone who funded armed resistance out of her own pocket. She built San Francisco's most powerful business network. She sent $30,000 to John Brown's Harper's Ferry raid. For years, she filed lawsuits against racial discrimination. She won. Newspapers called her Mammy Pleasant. She rejected that name her entire adult life. History books recorded her as a maid. She rejected that too. Her grave still stands in San Francisco's No Valley neighborhood. It bears the words she chose. This is the story of black women in the Wild West. They tried to write their own history. The system erased it time and again. And the women wrote it again and again. When the frontier closed, this system didn't end. It adapted. The names changed. The mechanisms didn't change. Which of these 20 names had you never heard of before today? Write in the comments. I read every single one. Share this video with someone who thinks Hollywood tells the story of the West accurately. And if you haven't subscribed yet, unsubscribe. Every Wednesday, we're here with a piece of history you didn't know.